dragons, spirits, ancient histories that are yet to be discovered, pacts with gods, and a goat. If you like any of those things, you should probably come check out the Broadswords. We are a non-binary and all-women podcast that play a little bit of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And let me tell you, there are not a lot of dice that are rolled, but there are a lot of shenanigans to be had. You can find us at thebroadswords.com or listen to us wherever your podcasts are cast.
You know things, I know some too. Sit right down, the femsplain them to you. If there's a thing you want to explain, these two feminists can entertain. Nerdy stuff, sexy stuff, so much to know. Tune in for the Femsplain Show.
Femsplain!
Good morning, Avalon.
Good morning, Diana.
Good morning, and good morning to our listeners. If you're listening to this at another point in time other than the morning,
Stop.
Get out of here.
Yep.
Go back, try again. This is a morning podcast. So Avalon, this is a podcast. This is a podcast called Femsplained. And what is Femsplained exactly?
Absolutely not going to help out with that. I'm
No?
not feeling helpful. I feel antagonistic. You're
That's
on your
fine.
own.
All right. So since I'm on my own, Femsplained is a queer femme podcast about being nerds in a nerd space where you can't be interrupted or quizzed. Yeah.
You can't be quizzed.
Can't be quizzed. Very important, very crucial to the Femsplained algorithm that you not be quizzed. And let's see. Last week we talked, Avalon talked about Final Fantasy X to a very confused me.
I've gotten a lot of feedback that people don't understand why I didn't do 7. So
yeah.
and that's feedback I'm not interested in.
No, I actually thought that the feedback that was the most funny to me on the Final Fantasy X was that people feel like it's a consensus that men love Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
And that the only time that Marty interjected was about Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
So I thought that
tracks.
pretty,
Yeah.
it tracks. So let's see. Has nerd culture done anything to fill your cup lately, Avalon?
I'm enjoying Loki. I don't know if you're watching it.
I am too. Yeah.
But I am liking it a lot. I feel like the episodes go by really quickly, and I'm mad that I'm not waiting until the end and then just binging it. I don't have the patience for weekly programming. So
see, I'm mad about that. I need a bingeable.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I should have waited till the end.
Yeah.
Because I have no self-control. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah. But I enjoy it.
Yeah, I do too. I'm really glad that they're giving me exactly what I want. I feel like I
want to know what that means for you without spoilers, but I can't. So
I'm not going to spoil this, but we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
So yes, Loki. Anything else?
I can't play Elder Scrolls anymore because of my hand injury. So
my God.
Frustrating.
That's very frustrating. Yeah. I'm very sorry.
That's about it.
You played Monster of the Week recently.
Yeah, fuck. Yeah, and that was wonderful. I got to guest on the Fae Realm. I hadn't actually played a TTRPG in a good while, let alone especially a streamed one, and it was really fun. And so now I would like to play more Monster of the Week. I liked how straightforward the system was. Oh,
I was going to ask about that because I haven't played it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty much just role play. It seems like it's role play, and then you can vaguely justify what you're doing by calling it one of your attributes. But I think you just get to do whatever you want.
Well, good. That's how I play D&D anyway, so it's fine. Fun. Excellent. I love that.
What has nerd culture done for you? You've been playing a million games.
I've been playing a million games. Mushroom game. Well, you know what? I feel personally victimized because I was sick all week, so I missed every single one of my games. Which I'm pretty bummed about. but Space Game is going really well. Mushroom Game going really well. And I have a game later today where that's brand new, and I'm pretty excited about that too. So I'm just playing lots of games, which is like a very different energy than like making quote unquote content, is like just getting to just play.
I'm proud of you for like not DMing at all anymore.
Playing.
I just
took that off the table for a while. I'm pretty happy about it. So I'm stoked about that. And anything else? No, that's it. Just playing lots of games. Yeah.
Nice.
Good. But we have other people who need to tell us about their nerd culture experiences recently. We have Derek and Freya here from Queer Arcana, which is the coolest. Hi. So good morning to both of you.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's evening here, but thank you.
Oh, yes.
You know what?
8 p.m.
Then you have to leave.
Yeah.
It's a morning only podcast.
Get out of here. So let's start with Derek. Has anything nerd culture done anything to fill your cup recently? What has been going on?
Oh my god, I've been watching back the Nintendo E3, I think, and I'm very happy for Shin Megami Tensei. That's going straight in my basket.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I'm very excited for everything new coming up. We had a rehearsal today with the Queer Arcana cast. We played D&D today. We did some improvisation theater. We did some cool character exercises. So yeah, our life is packed to the brim with D&D.
I love it.
That's a hell of a day. Thanks for bringing up E3, because I feel like we did a bad thing forgetting about it.
Yeah, we totally really grazed over that entirely. Yeah. What about you, Freya? What's nerd culture been doing for you?
Well, I think a lot. Recently, I've been finishing a long campaign I've been playing in, so that's nice. And I have been writing a fantasy book for the last couple months or so. I've started that, so I guess that's a gaming culture from another, or geek culture from another standpoint. So I think that's mostly what I've been doing. Yeah,
like when you say a fantasy book, you've been writing like a narrative, like a novel, or like a setting type of thing.
Yeah, so I've been mostly a world builder, I think, for 5 years now, and I've written quite a bunch when I was younger. But I was like, I have so many D&D and fantasy worlds now. Like, why don't I ever use them for something that is not D&D? So I just started writing. Yeah.
Oh, I love it so much. Wow. Well, thank you again for being here, and for sharing your time with us. We do have a topic which I'm very excited to talk about, because it's definitely a heavy one. And we're going to talk a little bit about consent rules in D&D, and if you can, kind of related to this, can you write fantasy that isn't sexist, homo, trans, or queer phobic? And my favorite part, what is left of fantasy culture when you get rid of these tropes? Which I love, and I'm excited to dig into.
Yeah.
Before we start really talking about that, though, I do want to just talk about Queer Arcana just a scotch, because it's so cool.
Thank you.
It's so distinct and interesting, because it's D&D, it's a drag show, it's a theater performance, but it's not quite 100% of any of those things. It's so the D&D that you're doing almost is coming across to me as like LARPing, because you're on right.
We're in costume, of course,
and you're not sat behind a table, you're moving the whole time, which is completely different from how we usually play D&D, of course.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So what we are a drag group, a group of drag performers that plays Dungeons and Dragons on a live stage, and then we edit it and we put it out as a web show, which you can watch on YouTube, and everything is for free on there. So go watch everything that we own. And yeah, so that's what we did. And I'm myself, I'm a designer, so I think a lot of doing like cultural projects. And Freya is a phenomenal dungeon master, and so I thought I have to use this woman for my personal gain. So Freya and me, we teamed up, and now I abuse her talents for this show. Yeah, really, you should check it out. She's like amazing voice actor and DM. And we set ourselves the goal, like, okay, we have an archetypical way of playing D&D, of course, which is around the table with your friends. And if we look at all the D&D streaming media, even on YouTube, we never really break the mold of this table. This table is such a ritual
Holy
in
artifact.
D&D.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a big D&D artifact, the table, and we saw an experiment in what if we can have these characters use their bodies and use space, like physical space, to enact these scenes, because I think we've seen this generational wave that is so hyper focused on role play in D&D that we felt like, okay, can we push that sort of to the next level?
Even more, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then it just spiraled out of control, because I originally am I'm a 3D visual artist, so I make art for video games. And then I just said, like, okay, now we're also going to do 3D graphics on top of our theater show and visual effects on top of the theater show. So it becomes this sort of half physical, half digital space where these queens just go on adventures, and all this sort of CGI is overlain, and it turned into this really weird monster of a project.
Yeah.
It sometimes feels, when you're watching it, it feels like drag artists playing D&D and trying to be a Marvel movie, in a sense.
Yeah.
Right, because there's that element to it also. It really is, it's very much its own thing, because I've seen some shows of I've seen drag queens playing D&D. We've seen porn stars playing D&D. We've seen what insert archetype here playing D&D, but it's always people around a table playing D&D. Just from a particular group. This is so very like different and new, and I think that's really, really cool.
I think that's in part also because people are really scared of the term and the idea of LARP generally, but LARP has such a close connection to D&D, as I think Derek and I found out when we did LARP and D&D simultaneously.
And
so
LARP is live action role playing, for the people who might not know the acronym.
Yes. And drag, of course, is also a very embodied art form in a sense. So it just felt very natural because we started, I think, with the idea of going behind a table, and then instantly we were like, oh, that'd be very strange for some reason. People just had to get off their seats and fully act it out.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool. So I think that it leads into this topic, this larger topic about, writing fantasy settings or games that are not, sexist or queerphobic. There's a certain advantage that comes that I think is difficult to explain to anybody who hasn't been in this scenario, but playing in a game where everybody around you is queer in some way there's like a little bit of a privilege in that like the effort that it takes to avoid those things just isn't isn't as high as it is when you're in, mixed company, I guess you would say.
Definitely.
Right. Have you, I guess, in your game, and Freya, is this game, as you're the DM, is this kind of a original setting of your invention?
Yeah. Well, Derek and I, we sort of co-DM for the most part. So Derek mostly does like, because when the players have to be on stage, it's a lot more effort to keep, especially if they're fucking drag artists. They're going to be chaotic on the stage.
I would imagine.
So
yeah.
Derek is mostly like stage management, and I'm mostly the narrative DM. It is a setting that I wrote. We originally started with inspiration from Sabrina's Chilling Adventures, and then
Oh.
sort of went off there regarding an actual fantasy setting, and that worked out quite well. I think it's a mix of all sorts of European cultures, which meshes quite interestingly, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we sort of, because I think our story, and we accidentally did that in the beginning, and then we found that out in the middle of the way. Like, Freya and me were having this conversation. Like, we've got to stop making every NPC an elderly woman, because we were sort of going around this sort of this house of misfits, but we use sort of witches and witchcraft as a sort of a very old metaphor of a sort of minority, being suppressed by a larger system. So and
marginalized
sort of
empowerment.
Definitely. So we started like from the metaphor of witchcraft, and it also felt very drag to start there, and
Sure.
we weren't at one point writing heterosexual male characters, and I think they almost don't appear well. And we accidentally, our mind wasn't just going there for some reason, right, Freya? Sorry if I'm misrepresented. Sure. And
No.
then in sort of in the middle, we sort of realized like, oh, we've been. So I think we're biased also in a certain sense, but then just the other way around. We were sort of writing based on our.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like the building pillars of the setting were like old matriarchs, which I think was interesting.
Sorry, that's a better explanation.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I mean, it fits the reason, I think, when you're building a setting on like the idea of witchcraft as marginalized empowerment. Like, of course, you're going to have matriarchs of some sort in that setting. Yeah. So that felt natural.
I'm curious. I don't want to make the assumption that your journey into even just finding out about D&D in the first place was maybe as gatekept as ours. Can you speak a little bit to your earlier experiences with D&D?
Yeah.
Freya, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think mine was pretty okay, actually, but that's mostly because I curated the community. So we kind of started, I think, 7 years ago or something, when the Critical Role hype really started going and everyone started playing D&D. And I wasn't out at the time yet, but a lot of people wanted to play, and I've been the forever DM since always. So I feel like that has given me more power to curate that small community of players as well in a nice way. So I didn't really find out about the gatekeeping as much until around the time I met Derek. Derek didn't do this, just to be clear.
I was the biggest gatekeeper. I kept you out for years.
But I met Derek at an open house like D&D table, an open table event sort of, and suddenly it was such culture shock because there was a lot of like the very stereotypical gatekeepy cis-het male players, and I was like, this is so strange. And then Derek kind of jumped out from that as not being so
as a gay, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think D&D is a very interesting. It's a bit of an odd duck sometimes for my experience in the sense of gatekeeping, because it's a social game that you often get introduced by friends if you're lucky. So I think my gatekeeping experience, I haven't had a one-on-one experience with gatekeeping because at the time I started D&D, I already was out of the closet and had a lot of queer friends, and I started D&D with my friend group, if that made sense. So
sure.
Yeah, so that's how it originated for me. Now, if there would have been a situation where I, as an individual, would have maybe joined an adventure league setting.
Yeah.
And Adventure League, for the people who don't know D&D, is more of a sort of a nationally organized event in the game shops that anybody can join. And then it is very location based on what kind of people you get there, of course. And it's very locally based, geographically based. If you have an open accepting town, it might be fine, but maybe so you're sort of taking a chance who you're going to meet in there. And then I can imagine gatekeeping happening a lot. Yeah, so I can't really speak for that experience, but you sort of hinted at that you have an experience with gatekeeping. Can you maybe tell something about that?
Yeah, definitely.
I just
it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not fun.
Oh shit! I'm so sorry to hear that.
That's fine.
It's fine. I think it's I think that what you said hits on kind of the opposite of what our experiences were, because you got into this after you had a more like accepting group of friends. And I think both of us inched our way into it initially before we had an accepting group of friends around. I think that's like kind of and was kind of introduced to it by like the more generalized public, or at least that was what it was like for me. Public gaming stores, public conventions, things like that, where I didn't have like a tight-knit circle of, queer friends, or even like feminist friends. Like I was kind of in that larger generalized population that it was introduced to me, and it was not as great.
Yeah. We had really shitty boyfriends who played.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us play.
That story
but I feel like the problem was that we had shitty boyfriends.
Yeah.
As much so as the fact that they wouldn't let us play.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let you play?
Oh yeah, no, that was a whole thing.
God.
Yeah.
My God.
That was a whole thing. It's really fine because knowing what we know now, that would have not been a fun time. So,
oh yeah, true. I think it actually would have been horrible if they let us play.
Yeah, it would have been bad. But so I think it's interesting. So like the group that you're playing with has so much to do with what the experience is going to be like.
Definitely.
And in some groups, like deleting, or in some groups, those sexist tropes, those transphobic tropes, queerphobic tropes, it does feel like you have to manually delete them. But like in a queer friendly, like all queer group, it doesn't feel so much like you're like deleting these things as like just kind of like what you said, that you like accidentally forgot to create like cishet male characters, because like you're just telling your own story from your own definitely. Inner perspectives.
We do hear the horror stories from from people that are listening to our show, or like thanking us in a certain way. And we also try to sort of feel the waters, like in the Dutch D&D community. So we post like on the Facebook groups, like, do queer people have experiences with that? And there are so many stories coming up about people having experiences with gatekeeping or being made uncomfortable. So let's say it's not obvious gatekeeping, like outright. Sometimes it's just being super uncomfortable at the table, people making women in general, like people making advances on your character without you asking. It's sort of weird subconscious conduct also that that's also gatekeeping, of course.
We see that as well in like LARPing as well a lot, and we talk about this because this phenomenon is so weird. But in many sort of male-centric spaces, as many LARPs, I think, and D&D spaces, there's so much weird, unnecessary desire for plot around women's bodies. It is so weird. Like half of the LARPs I've been to had some sort of pregnancy plot. Or like,
definitely.
Why ever is this? It's so strange.
Live action roleplay is another well of darkness. I mean,
that's why I haven't done it.
it has more sides, of course, because we found great joy and also sort of the biggest adrenaline rushes during live action role play.
Sure.
So for us, it is feeling conflicted to talk about that. I mean, like I went with my sister to a LARP, and her character was sort of invited into a rape plotline with a barbarian chieftain.
Sure.
And this was her first time, sort of as a newcomer, going to the LARP, and and she agreed with it, and with great joy. She saw the fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of that's how she said it. And then we had a conversation afterwards, like, we were talking about, okay, but then did you do that because you wanted to sort of like please the people organizing it, or you felt it was like too much trouble to say,
To
like,
rock
no,
the boat. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. You don't want to be a party pooper. People saying like, oh no, why you're making trouble out of this. So there's this whole, I don't know. It just, I think, and of course nobody meant any harm with it, but I think it's a subconscious
Right.
form of gatekeeping again, because male characters never get rape plots. If I say
Right.
like, oh yeah, now your character was raped in a bush and now it has HIV. Or I mean, like that's sort of like if you say that to a male character, saying like, and then like, no, I don't want you to decide that for my character. It's like, okay, then stop writing pregnancy plot for the female characters.
Right.
Or something. Yeah.
This is actually, so years ago, the very first panel that I was on was about, and this is like before I, knew about or experienced, the larger queer culture in gaming. I was not fully out, like all kinds of things. So I was just on this panel, and it was just about being a woman in gaming, and it was just me like at this massive con, and like all they could find was like me and one other girl. That was the panel, quote unquote. And we did this panel, talking about tropes that come up a lot. And one was a sexual assault trope, a damsel in distress tropes, things that you're either encountering a ton of in game, or it's being pushed onto your character, or sometimes it's like baked in, like in the old AD&D, like Gary Gygax had like one loot table that included women in it, like that you could like get as a reward for completing a task. That's how like, baked into this it has been. And so we talked about those tropes during this, and how like, encountering them so much, maybe the first time it doesn't phase you, like maybe maybe the first 3 times you don't even notice it, but then like just over time it starts to erode like how much fun this is, for you. And I remember that the video of the panel was posted online, and it was just bombarded with this comment section of men being like, well, that's just good storytelling. Like those tropes are tropes because they are good storytelling. And that brings me, like, I was thinking about that, and I've been thinking about that in relation to this question, what's left of fantasy culture when you get rid of these tropes? And I'm like, so much better stories. Those, like, what, like, how can you not see that the same damsel in distress plotline or is boring? It is, it's not good.
The question also begs, like, when they say, well, it's just good storytelling for whom? I mean, it's very clearly marketed towards one people, and I think that's very lazy storytelling in that sense.
Right. So like, that begs me to ask, for you all in Queer Arcana, like, how can you possibly tell a story without those tropes? How have you been doing it all this time?
Yeah, Freya, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big subject. I think largely we and other queer D&D groups don't know the answer to this, because I feel like partially it comes naturally in a sense. I remember recently visiting my first setting, which I wrote when I wasn't out yet, and I spotted a lot of these under the radar things I didn't even realize back then, where it's like, this is not problematic in a sense, but it is very lazy story writing. It is sort of subversive tropes in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to look back on my history of world building and seeing that it is, in a sense, experience, I think, to break free from those, both personally, to let go of like internalized phobia of stuff, but also just to be a better world builder in a sense, to make more interesting choices regarding that. It's difficult to give a clear-cut answer to this. What do you think, Derek?
So we have been writing a story where I think almost everybody in a big seat of power is a woman,
or queer,
or a queer person. I think those are maybe the main NPCs. So what I think is that the story that we're telling feels, in that sense, modern-ish. Yeah, and that's the thing, that when you sort of, I think, when you remove homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia from your story, it's gonna, I think, feel. I'm not a professional story writer, so I'm just basically saying my own opinions on the matter. I think you lose that sort of maybe that classic medieval gritty sense that some people are looking for, and sort of lazily using these tropes to sort of gain that, saying like, okay, in medieval times, women were beating up, or in that certain sense, and then I think, okay, but why do you want to reimagine that in your weekend? Because that is the real question, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Why is your escapism?
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
Yeah. Again, an ad
real
at the LARP community. I'm sorry, I still love you, LARP community, and you are rather inclusive. But also, why do you want these things in your world?
Yeah,
you could just take them
Yeah.
away.
Right. It's, and I think the answer we can kind of come to is that, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism, etc., they are not affecting the people who find those stories entertaining in real life.
No.
So
Yeah.
they find it entertaining to engage with that in their free time, because it's not something they have to worry about outside of that game.
Yeah.
So it's just like a fun little, I don't know, thought
Yeah.
exercise. Whereas for people who are affected by misogyny or homophobia or transphobia, like, we don't want to deal with that in our fantasy, because we're already dealing with it. Like, it's we did that. Sucks.
Yeah.
I love the tiefling in this regard as a 5th edition thing, in that it was so like reclaimed by a community in the book.
Oh my God.
It's become the queer
like, be
race.
ready for racism, and then all the non male cisheads were like, okay, but they are also rainbow colors, and let's not do the racism.
Yeah. And that whole born evil thing, let's not do that either, because
exactly.
Yeah.
I had some ideas actually when now you're talking, Derek. Oh, this is why we complement each other so well.
Oh my God, we're the best.
I was thinking about like a non-sexist, homophobic, trans, queerphobic setting, and I think it is in part taking tropes, because I think that's what you do as a writer and as a world builder inevitably at some point, right? But it's critically looking at those tropes, like, why, if there is an element of phobia in this, I think 99% of the time it is completely unnecessary, and you can take it out of the trope and the trope still functions for the most part. If you look at gritty realism can still be there without phobia. You just can't do sexual assault plot for the most part. But gritty realism can still be a trope in this sense. And for example, the Lancer, I mean, which is like a writing, for people who aren't familiar with that term, is a sort of a character who's the immediate sidekick to the protagonist, as a sense, is mostly always written as a male character, a brash male character. Like, why ever is that a necessity? So I think in most of the tropes that we find that are used in D&D, you can, with work, detach those tropes from their phobic parts or their not inclusive parts. And if you do that, you can still include them in your world, and it can be an inclusive world in a sense. It just takes, I think, a lot more work as a writer, world builder, DM in a sense. What I really find interesting is there's academic studies on this as well, in social studies regarding D&D and RPGs and LARPs as sort of a tool for imagining perfect worlds. So it can be such a powerful tool for queer people, women, whatever sort of marginalized community, to sort of see what could be on the horizon in our actual world, to imagine sort of a perfect world and to start living towards that. It's such a good way, I think. Like it's a collective thought experiment with each other, and I think
And I think I do have to agree with sort of people saying like, yeah, but that is just fantasy. And I think in a sense it is, because sexism and has been so written also into Tolkien structure.
Yeah.
And I think because we've copied and pasted and built it upon that and modified it and remixed so much of that sort of that original fantasy content without unpackaging it properly, we now have this gigantic pop culture lens that makes use of sexism unknowingly, or maybe knowingly and not caring. So in that sense, I maybe do agree saying like, okay, if you're getting rid of sexism and racism and queerphobia out of fantasy, then you get rid of an essential part of fantasy. And then I think, yeah, that's true. Let's do it anyway.
That's a good point, because like even if the argument that it's meant to be there or that it is part of it necessarily, it would be true. Screw it. Who cares? Let's get rid of it anyway. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a general rule of thumb also about consent rules, like at the table and players. Like, man, let's care first for the people who actually exist in this world, and then for their fantasy characters. Let's prioritize the actual physically able to touch people first, and then worry about the fantasy characters.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's so logical to me, but it's
that's very reasonable.
I mean, like
even what you said prior.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm lagging. 1 second.
But I mean, like, your fantasy world is so low on my priority list.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Freya, were you about to say something?
Oh, I think I'm back. Yeah, sorry, I just glitched so hard there.
That's all right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It, like, even what you said before, it's such a weird analogy to say like it's an essential part of fantasy. That's like saying, imagine a world where murder is not illegal, and we just say, no, but we can't make murder illegal because that's part of our culture. Like, what does it even mean? Like, obviously it's a bad thing, so why would you not want another version where that is not included?
Right.
I think that's kind of the onus, where people don't even believe that's a problem.
Right. And then, but even from that, you can create a new world that has to come up with new solutions to that problem. Like, there are so many ways that you can go around this.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think we see this even with newer worlds, like quite modern worlds. Of course, I think let's take Harry Potter as an example, of which I think that is a world, like, when we started living in that world, like before, we thought it was the example of the world that didn't have these features in the beginning. At least I was under the illusion, it's like, oh yeah, this is sort of a thing where that kind of sexism, transphobia doesn't happen. Boy, were we wrong, of course. So I think it kind of shows how subversive it is. And and how much we do need to spot for these things.
And also, I think
they creep into your fantasy world so quickly.
Yeah. And also, I think how much as marginalized groups we want to believe that something is inclusive, because there's a very interesting podcast I've been listening a lot to over the last year, Which Please, which is an analysis of two academics about like literally all the Harry Potter books. They go super slow, but it's super in depth, and it's so interesting to see that like almost none of it is inclusive. But I think when a lot of people read it, we felt like it was when we were younger for the most part, because it inherently feels like some sort of a marginalized or queer story in a sense. It is codified to seem that way. And then we just aren't critical anymore for some reason. Yeah. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of world building in modern media as well.
I really appreciate that, because I feel like as a queer person who has some sort of guilt that the onus was on me as an 11-year-old falling in love with this world to not catch that. I don't know. It's kind of like, it's a little bit heartbreaking for me sometimes to realize the extent to which I almost felt duped into resonating with this queer codified tale, only to have, I don't know.
Well, we were talking about that recently when we talked about queer coding, and how when you don't see yourselves in media very often, you are so desperate to attribute your like recognizable qualities to yourself in that media. So like that's the whole reason why queer baiting works, like where they can just have two men like look at each other one time and we're like, I see it. There it is.
Thank you. Thank you for just that.
Listen, I have to admit something. I'm now currently, I have never really binged it, but I'm now binging Teen Wolf. So, you know, that tells a lot about my
that's so funny
taste level. That's my taste level. And there's this first season where one of the main characters turns over to this dude. And I was already attracted to one of these main characters. And he goes over to this dude and says, "Oh, wait, third question. Are you attracted to me?" And I was like, yes, yeah. I was sort of like screaming. I was pausing. I was doing like a little, you know, like a very little unflattering dance. And then later in the season, it turns out he was sort of a little bit like tricking the guy into like delivering information for him. And then I was like, not only am I queer baited, he literally queer baited the queer in the show. I was like, oh my god,
that's hilarious. So, I've never seen that show, but we actually know someone on it. I guess.
Wow. Oh yeah. I guess we do.
I don't know, like we have a friend, we go camping with a friend, and she the other day was like, my brother's Dylan O'Brien.
That's interesting.
I don't know. Is that the queer baity one? I want to know now.
Oh, I want to know if he's the queer baity one.
Okay. What was it?
Then it is his personal responsibility to set things right.
Yeah. We're gonna blame him now.
I'm now on a vendetta.
I don't know very many people who act, so I'm excited about this one. It's Styles is the character he plays.
That is the guy.
I knew it.
Okay, so once again, the queer army has joined forces.
Yep, we can personally bully him now.
Okay,
nice,
great. Go to that person. First of all, say hello, great fan, very attracted. How dare you? There you go. I'm a drag queen. Look me up. I'm pretty big. No. Yeah, and then say thanks for the queer bait.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna do.
Oh my gosh, phenomenal. I want to talk to just a little bit about how, you know, like the tapestry of queerness is bigger too than what little scraps we do get in our fantasy media. Like we're very lucky if we get like the occasional like cis lesbian couple or like cis gay couple like thrown in as side characters, when meanwhile like there's this whole rich thick tapestry of identities and orientations that all intersect and mesh with each other. And from my understanding, for your group, Queer Arcana is not at all a binary, like your binary queer drag group as well.
Yeah. You want to say something about that, Freya?
Well, the first thing that pops to mind is that half of the crew is non-binary, first of all. So
that happens very quickly.
I know this is an audio format, but I'm cheering.
Oh yeah. I can
Yeah,
confirm. I see you cheer.
yeah, it is interesting. I like 5 people came out, including myself, as some sort of other gender identity during the Queer Arcana project since we started 2 years ago. And I feel like it's such also because it's such a safe space to experiment. Again, regarding like the perfect imagined worlds and trying out new identities, what I mentioned before. But it's I think if there was a community where it's easy to come out, it's here, because you're doing LARPing in a sense, you're doing queer LARPing, it's in costume, you can do literally whatever. So I feel like that's very empowering in a sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
it's such an interesting mix of people, of course, and this is also why we changed the name. We used to be called Dungeon Drag Queens. That was, of course, a funny gag name, and now we're Queer Arcana, because it just felt more inclusive.
It's a great name.
We call ourselves oh, thank you. We call ourselves drag performers. So I think we have every type of drag, and people who are explicitly non-binary drag. Also, so we do want to pay respects to all the sort of drag forms out there, because maybe for listeners who don't really know that there is, in drag culture, you don't only have drag queens, you have a very big variety of drag performers. Like drag kings comes to mind, of course, as sort of the inverse of a drag queen, but there's also a sort of spectrum in the middle where non-binary drag can maybe be more alien visuals, or a combination of masculinity and femininity, or anything sort of outside of a spectrum or of masculinity and femininity. So it's truly gender exploration through visuals. That is sort of what the term is being stretched out to be right now. And we wanted to create a project that visualizes that stretching of that concept and still keep it fantasy as people recognize it. So they look at our show and it's like, oh, this is a fantasy group. And
I'm just saying, like, as a bisexual person, non-binary person, like D&D and other games where you get to explore parts of your identity are literally crucial, to that experience. Yeah.
Because do you have that experience where you were interacting with your queerness during D&D?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, at first, playing characters that got to have like sapphic romances, or characters that were I've played male characters and women characters, non-binary characters. I've played characters that are gay and straight and bisexual and pansexual and whatever, and you're just kind of finding all of these like how all of those experiences like might feel like, and you're just kind of playing with what it might feel like if that were you. And then sometimes you're like, oh, maybe that one might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
Sorry if there was some laughing in the background. It was my girlfriends playing Kingdom Hearts and saw Chicken Little and then went crazy.
Oh my God.
Sorry,
they
continue.
really have dug to the bottom of the barrel. With Kingdom Hearts, it's wild to me, that franchise.
This is why people don't take us seriously, Freya. We've mentioned Kingdom Hearts and Teen Wolf in the context of world building and storytelling.
No, I think this makes perfect sense to me. Avalon, you were about to say something though.
Well, no, I particularly appreciate what you all are doing, aside from the fact that it's just really fucking cool, because my like queer journey and queer exploration and stuff is because I do queer burlesque. So there's a lot of drag overlap. Our troupe, we have a lot of different non-binary identity, drag queen, king, whatever. And that is where like I unpacked stepping into queer characters through costume and performance so much more than D&D. And then I think that I was able to bring that energy to GMing and NPCs and things like that. So I just think that is so cool.
Yeah, because that's an interesting question. Maybe it's like how how did the process of dressing up for you, or going into a character physically, how did that, because in D&D we make characters, but it's only with our mind very often. How did it for you feel to have that physical element to transformation?
Yeah, I specifically with gender in, creating a song or concept for a performance, the energy that kind of went into deciding, okay, like how femme is this number going to be?
Yeah.
For me was super empowering. Performing certain numbers with no makeup, or, starting to look into like chest binding for certain numbers versus being like full showgirl high femme for another number, and what kind of physical energy and movement comes into the dance that's associated with that. Definitely has been my big queer exploration.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of overlap in drag and burlesque circles?
Sorry, did you say my name or Derek's name? I didn't hear.
To both of you. Open question.
Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, I think I'm more in the drag scene of the two of us, but I think we visited the same places, Freya. I was drag queen before the world ended.
Yes.
Exactly. I was a drag queen at a quite an explicit gay bar. So this is a little bit more fetish culture, and there, we had an overlap between burlesque and drag. Maybe that is incidental. Maybe my experience is a unique one. Freya, do you maybe know something more about the burlesque scene in the Netherlands?
Not necessarily outside of what I've seen of Club Church, so I'm afraid I can't add in that department.
Yeah. I know there is overlap, especially I think since a lot of, I assume young boys have started to do drag, and then maybe might have felt also that, okay, like drag is maybe too much of a costume, but I like the sensuality of the drag character I'm doing. I'd like to perform something that is not like classically drag, but I still want to play with this androgynous sexuality, and then move over to burlesque, or then jump over. So I think there you can easily slide into both subcultures from one to the other. I think they
for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny to me, I guess, on the flip side, to see people who are, identifying as femme, who are getting into burlesque, and then are slowly kind of getting more into lip syncing, and then they're kind of discovering that maybe they identify as more non-binary, so then they have this alternative burlesque drag king character, and then it at some point, at least where I perform, it's just all becomes so mashed up, and which I think is wonderful. It's really fun. But we still call it burlesque, even though I think half of us are just like, we're some combination of gender play, stripping, and lip syncing.
Yeah.
Because you call it specifically queer burlesque. Is there still within the larger burlesque scene, is that a subculture for a reason? Is there a more conservative core to burlesque, or is it in general pretty open?
I mean, I think that it's fairly open, but I think if you're just using the term burlesque, you're getting a lot of people who are just very interested in recreating this classical vintage hourglass super femme performance with the fans and the feathers and everything else. And I think that the core of that, some people can be almost like quite religious about respecting that it stays that way. Queer burlesque, I think it not only implies that, okay, if you're an audience member coming to this, like you're going to see a lot of different kinds of bodies. But also I think it's just messier. I don't know. It's more modern sometimes. It's gay. It's, So
it definitely, I think it's a distinction that maybe it not everywhere needs to be made, but I know that my experience with before hearing about queer burlesque specifically, my experience with burlesque was always like the the classic quote unquote style of,
Which is not to say, I mean, that's so campy. Like, it's not to say that that's not inherently queer as well.
Right.
I almost think that it's more about signaling to the audience. Don't just come here for tits. Like, I think is really the big thing.
Yeah, it's strange, it's interesting to hear all of this, because I did drag outside of Queer Arcana, I think for a year and a half or so, just before I came out as trans. And then when I came out trans, it kind of lost its interest to me for the most part. So I do it still for Queer Arcana, but it's more of a costume suddenly. For me personally, instead of like an embodied art form, whatever. Again, everyone moves on stage in our show. I just sit down as an old woman in like a Victorian dress and then read the script. Not the full script. But as a metaphor. So I think there is also like a very different trans experience in that, and kind of circling back to what we had before regarding queer identities and kind of figuring it out in D&D. For me, that was really interesting as well. I really figured out before I came out as trans what kind of woman I wanted to be through D&D by just playing a great number of different types of social women in a sense. And that was a great experience, which really helped me when I actually came out. So I think there's so much power in that. And I think the flip side of that was the embodied trying it out in drag, which I then very quickly found out that it's not really.
Yeah. Because, sorry, if I may ask a question to Freya, like how do you in general, because I think that's maybe one of our questions that we pre-written, how in general do you think that drag intersects with trans identity? Because there's a lot of like arguments like, okay, it muddies the conversation surrounding trans rights a lot because people think that trans people are drag queens and drag queens are trans people. What do you think sort of? Yeah, okay. It's a very deep and complicated subject, of course, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of difficult arguments regarding this. I mean, you have the RuPaul stance, of course, which is problematic regarding this, and then you have the social progressive argument, I think, of like what you just said, like the fact there will be confusion, which I think is sort of an inherently conservative talking point in general, I feel like, when it comes to progressive politics. Yeah, I mean, we see so many, last week, Laganja came out as trans as well. I mean, there's been such a large influx of like popular drag artists coming out as non-binary or as trans, which I think is very interesting. But I mean, it makes sense that there's a lot of overlap, because even more than D&D, I think it is a great way to try it out in a sense. It's fucking with gender, and I think with Queer Arcana we're doing that like as well, maybe on another level still, because it's so confusing. But
you definitely are.
Yeah,
great.
It's really such a great way to just throw your preconceived notions of gender out the window and just see where you land. I remember the first time that I did my own drag makeup when you kind of threw me into the pit of a club church. It was such a strange experience, because I was looking at myself in the mirror and I really didn't recognize myself. And I hear that a lot when people do drag for the first time, in a sense, but I still felt it was different as a trans person. And every time you talked about it, about how you felt before, during, after drag, it was inherently different, which to me was an indicator that I, in a sense, was different. So I think that is also a powerful tool for identification in that scene, because by sort of making these things explicit, by embodying different genders, different expressions, etc., you only then really start to notice what you feel, I guess, in a sense. So yeah, it's just interesting. I don't know how it relates to trans identities in a sense, but I mean, of course, it's going to intersect in some way.
Absolutely. Well, I think that there's, it just makes a lot of sense to me, like just as a person who's never done drag or burlesque or anything like it. It just feels like it absolutely can be a performance, and maybe for some people it's just performing, but it also might be self-expression. And for some people, it might be so much self-expression that it's, that you're externalizing something that is real, Yeah.
Sorry, I think that's also a generational thing that we're finding out now, because the big statements from older drag queens were like, okay, I dress up like a woman, but I am a man. This is something that RuPaul himself keeps very much repeating, and sort of a lot of drag queens see a lot of value in keeping that separate, saying like, okay, no, but I am still a man. And I don't know if that's a generational thing, but that conversation, I think it's firing up again, sort of now that we see a lot of overlap in the drag and trans community.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
That is. Well, just before we completely run away, because we could probably talk about all these things for days. Can you tell me more about where to find everything that you do regarding Queer Arcana? Where do we go to seek it all out?
Sure. Yeah, we have a YouTube channel. You can just YouTube Queer Arcana, but I'm also.
We will link it all in our descriptions. Absolutely.
Definitely. So Queer Arcana on YouTube. We have an Instagram, which is the Queer Arcana, because somebody snatched that other name.
I saw that. I did see that.
Yeah, well spotted. Yeah.
I was like,
yeah,
what is that? That's not it. So YouTube channel. Do you all have anything like Patreons or Twitter or things like that where's the best place to find out what's the latest?
Yeah. So our Instagram is always up to date. I will guide you to our Patreon, which hopefully is updated. Let me check. It is not updated to our new name. It is, but I think we might not know. As we're broadcasting that, it will be DNDQNL on Patreon.
Okay, great.
And if that link changes, we'll update you.
Yes, and we'll update it in the description and everything. Well, this was fantastic. Please, if you're listening to this ridiculous podcast, run and go watch the videos for Queer Arcana. You will not be disappointed. It is a great time. And let's see, Avalon, what are you doing after this?
Same thing I say every time. I'm going to go watch a bunch of Queer Arcana on YouTube.
Great.
And I'm going to look forward to the world opening up and you all like touring it in some capacity, so that it's not just on YouTube.
Same. Freya, what about you? What are you doing after this?
I am summoning Chicken Little in Kingdom Hearts, I think.
I thought that might be the answer. Something to do with Kingdom Hearts. That's fantastic.
No, I'm joking. I am going to further build my writing studio because I'm buying a bunch of desks and stuff.
Excellent. And Derek, what are you doing after this?
I may or may not be returning my senses to Teen Wolf.
No, we support you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a problem. I admit it.
Yeah, I watch very bad TV.
Yeah,
very bad.
We're in that.
Yeah.
And I am gonna get ready to play some D&D. So that's my
nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us. This was absolutely lovely.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, we're very honored. We were looking forward to it a lot.
Good. Please go follow the lovely group of Queer Arcana online, and that's it. Bye-bye. You can find all of our Femsplained content either on patreon.com/femsplained, Twitter, you can find us at femsplainedcast, Instagram, you can find us at Femsplained Podcast, and you can check out superdylan.com/femsplained to find the guest form and all of the different places where you can listen and connect with us.
Awesome. You can find and follow me, Avalon, at @A_catattack on both Twitter and Twitch.
And you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, and all the places at SuperDylan, and that is DILLIN.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your support. Bye.
Bye.